They died in a hail of 130 bullets on a dusty Louisiana road in 1934. Their bodies were so riddled with lead that undertakers had trouble preparing them for burial. But here's what nobody tells you. Bonnie and Clyde weren't Robin Hood. They were stone-cold killers who murdered at least 13 people, including cops who had families waiting at home. Yet somehow, America turned them into legends. How did two small-town kids from Texas become the most romanticized murderers in American history? And why do we still glamorize their violence almost a century later? The truth about Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow is far darker and far stranger than any movie ever showed. Because behind the iconic photograph of Bonnie with a cigar and a gun, there was a trail of blood that stretched across 5 states. A trail that law enforcement couldn't stop. A trail that ended in an ambush so brutal, it shocked even the hardened lawmen who pulled the triggers. This is the real story, and it starts in the slums of Dallas, where poverty, desperation, and a twisted kind of love created America's most infamous outlaw couple. Texas, 1930. The Great Depression had torn America apart. Banks were foreclosing on farms, families were starving, and in the crowded, filthy neighborhoods of West Dallas, young people had 2 choices: work yourself to death for pennies, or take what you needed. Clyde Chestnut Barrow was born into crushing poverty, the 5th of 7 children in a family that lived in a wagon, under a bridge. By age 16, he was already stealing cars. Small-time stuff. But Clyde had something dangerous: ambition. He didn't just want to survive, he wanted to be somebody. And in his mind, that meant being an outlaw, a folk hero, someone people feared and respected. Then there was Bonnie Elizabeth Parker, 19 years old, 5 feet tall, barely 90 pounds. She'd been a good student, even won prizes for poetry and acting, but she was trapped in a dead-end marriage to a man serving time for murder. Bonnie was drowning in boredom, working as a waitress, dreaming of Hollywood stardom. When Bonnie met Clyde in January 1930 at a friend's house, it wasn't love at first sight, it was obsession. Clyde represented everything Bonnie craved: danger, excitement, escape. And Bonnie, she gave Clyde something he never had: loyalty. Absolute, unshakable loyalty. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Within months, they were robbing gas stations. And within a year, they were killing. But here's what most people don't know. Bonnie and Clyde weren't working alone. They ran with a rotating crew called the Barrow Gang. Clyde's brother Buck, Buck's wife Blanche, and a teenage gunman named W.D. Jones, who was just 16 when he started killing with them. This wasn't the Bonnie and Clyde from the movies. This was a small, vicious gang of amateurs who got lucky, again and again and again. The robberies started small: gas stations, mom-and-pop grocery stores. They never made much money, sometimes just $5 or $10. But what they lacked in profit, they made up for in violence. Clyde had a rule: never be taken alive. He'd rather die in a shootout than spend another day in prison. Why? Because Clyde had already done time, and what happened to him there broke something inside him. In 1930, Clyde was sentenced to 14 years in the brutal Eastham prison farm in Texas. Inmates were worked like slaves, beaten, sexually assaulted. Clyde was so desperate to escape the labor that he convinced another inmate to chop off 2 of his toes with an axe. By the time he was paroled in 1932, Clyde Barrow wasn't just a thief anymore. He was a man with nothing to lose, and that made him incredibly dangerous. The gang's first confirmed kill came in 1932. A store owner in Hillsboro, Texas, shot during a robbery. Then a sheriff in Atoka, Oklahoma. Then a deputy in Texas. The bodies kept piling up, but so did the headlines. Newspapers ate it up. Photos of Bonnie and Clyde, playfully posing with guns, were published across the country. In one famous image, Bonnie stood with a pistol, a cigar clenched between her teeth. It was staged as a joke, but the public saw a female outlaw, and they loved it. The timing was perfect. Americans were angry at banks, angry at the system. And here were 2 young kids sticking it to authority, robbing banks, evading police, living free. But that's the lie. Bonnie and Clyde weren't robbing banks. They mostly hit gas stations and small stores because banks had better security. They weren't rich. They were living in stolen cars, eating canned food, sleeping in filthy motels or on the side of the road. And they definitely weren't heroes. They were murdering anyone who got in their way. By 1933, law enforcement across 5 states was hunting them, and the Barrow gang's luck was about to run out. July 1933, Platte City, Missouri. The Barrow gang had holed up in a tourist cabin trying to lay low, but someone tipped off the police. Just after midnight, lawmen surrounded the cabin and opened fire. What happened next was chaos. Blanche Barrow screamed. Buck Barrow, Clyde's older brother, was shot in the head, the bullet fragmenting through his skull. Somehow the gang shot their way out. Buck bleeding and barely conscious, Blanche blinded by shattered glass. They drove for days, Buck dying slowly in the back seat. They finally stopped at an abandoned amusement park in Iowa, and that's where the police caught up with them again. This time, Buck was captured. He died from his wounds 5 days later. Blanche was arrested, blinded in one eye, and sentenced to 15 years. W.D. Jones eventually turned himself in. Bonnie and Clyde escaped, again, but now it was just the two of them, wounded, exhausted, and running out of places to hide. If you love dark, real stories about America's most infamous outlaws, stories that reveal the brutal truth behind the legends, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. It helps more than you know. And trust me, this story only gets darker from here. By early 1934, Bonnie and Clyde had become America's most wanted criminals. The FBI, still a new organization, was involved, but it was a Texas lawman named Frank Hamer who would finally end their run. Hamer was a legendary former Texas Ranger, tough, methodical, patient. He studied the Barrow gang's patterns, tracked their movements across state lines, and interviewed their families. He knew Bonnie and Clyde always circled back to Louisiana, where they had friends in hiding spots, and he knew exactly how to trap them. May 23, 1934, a rural road near Sales, Louisiana. Frank Hamer and 5 other lawmen waited in the bushes beside Highway 154. They'd been tipped off by one of the gang's associates, a man named Henry Methvin, whose father agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency for his son. The setup was simple. Methvin's father would stage a flat tire on the side of the road. When Bonnie and Clyde stopped to help, the officers would take them alive. At least that was the plan. But when the stolen Ford V8 came roaring down the road at 9:15 a.m., something changed. Maybe the lawmen panicked. Maybe they saw Clyde reach for a gun. Or maybe they just knew that Bonnie and Clyde would never surrender. What happened next lasted less than 2 minutes, but it was so violent, so excessive, that people still argue about it today. The officers opened fire. All 6 of them. Shotguns, rifles, Browning automatic rifles. They poured 130 rounds into the car. Bonnie and Clyde didn't stand a chance. Bonnie died instantly, her body slumped in the passenger seat. Clyde was hit so many times, the coroner later said he had 17 entry wounds in his head alone. When the shooting stopped, the car looked like Swiss cheese. And then something disturbing happened. The lawmen realized they'd become part of the legend. Within hours, locals swarmed the scene. They stole bullet casings, tried to cut off locks of Bonnie's hair, even attempted to cut off Clyde's trigger finger as a souvenir. The officers had to fire warning shots to keep the crowd back. Bonnie and Clyde's bodies were taken to a funeral home in Louisiana, then transported back to Dallas. Over 20,000 people attended Bonnie's funeral. Clyde's drew even more. They were buried separately. Bonnie's mother refused to let them be buried together, saying Clyde had kept her daughter long enough. But here's the part that haunts people. Bonnie Parker never fired a single shot during the ambush. In fact, there's debate over whether Bonnie ever killed anyone. Most of the murders were Clyde's. Bonnie was just there, a willing accomplice, a victim of her own obsession. And yet she's just as famous, just as romanticized. So why do we remember Bonnie and Clyde as legends instead of what they really were? Desperate, violent criminals who left a trail of grieving families. Maybe it's because we love the myth of the outlaw, the rebel, the underdog, fighting the system. Bonnie and Clyde became symbols of rebellion during a time when America felt broken. They represented freedom, even if that freedom was built on blood. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe we just love a tragic love story. 2 kids against the world, doomed from the start, dying together in a hail of bullets. But the truth is uglier. Bonnie and Clyde weren't heroes. They were killers who destroyed lives. Not just the people they shot, but the families of those victims, the lawmen who hunted them, and their own families who lived in shame. The Wild West era might have ended decades before Bonnie and Clyde, but their story proves something. The outlaw myth never really died. It just evolved, and we're still falling for it. If you want more brutal, untold stories from America's darkest history, the real stories behind the legends, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Drop your city and country below. And don't go anywhere. There's another nightmare from America's past waiting for you in the next video. See you there.